Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2, and today I wanted to show you guys an updated version of what I believe to be the best build in the entire game that, if set up properly, can do absolutely insane amounts of damage, killing pretty much everything in the game in a matter of just seconds, doing well over 50 million damage per second. I wanted to make an updated version of the build because a few things have changed since my previous video, and honestly, I wanted to make a version of the build that I think is going to last pretty much forever and most likely won't be like super affected by any crazy nerfs that may or may not happen in the future. So if you're watching this video months ahead of time, this build still should be insanely good, literally just because of the core functionality of it, which should not really get changed. What's great about this build is that for those of you that really hate using pixies and would rather just use guns, you can actually use guns and do an insane amount of damage as well, which is a ton of fun to play with, and you have a crazy amount of options when it comes to what gun you want to use. Before I get into the video, I want to give a big thanks to today's sponsor, which helps enable me to create content for a living, and that sponsor is Raid Shadow Legends. Raid Shadow Legends, if you somehow haven't already heard of it, is an impressively high quality action RPG game that's available on both mobile and PC, and has millions of players and an insane amount of content to do, ranging from campaign battles, PvP, dungeons, huge boss fights, and tons more. And with over 600 champions and hundreds of artifacts to collect, you'll never run out of things to do in Raid. If you're interested, make sure to check out the link in the description to hop into Raid today. This month, Raid is celebrating their 3-year anniversary as one of the top RPG games out there, so I thought it would be fitting to look back and see some of the amazing things that they've added to the game over the years. The Doom Tower is an amazing addition to the game that introduces a ton of new and super cool bosses to fight. With over 120 levels, the Doom Tower is super expansive and offers a ton of very enjoyable content with plenty of rewards. One of the coolest things they added recently actually is a new Hydra Clan boss. What I love about it is that each head actually has different mechanics. So in order to beat it, you have to use different strategies based on which head you're fighting to actually succeed. It's super challenging, but it's a ton of fun fighting like a Raid style boss, and I can't wait to see more boss fights like it. Lastly, the best thing about Raid is that they continue to add more and more awesome champions every month, constantly giving me something to grind for. One of my favorite things about Raid is how many champions there are to unlock. There's an endless amount of new and interesting champions to get, and being able to fully customize them and seeing how they interact with my other champions is a ton of fun. There's never been a better time to hop into Raid, as they're celebrating the 3-year anniversary by giving everyone free gifts, as well as adding a bunch of new content and events, such as new champions and new artifact sets. There's also going to be a full month of special events and tournaments planned. If you use my link or scan the QR code right here, new players will get a free starter pack worth $40, including champions Misericord, Tiger Soul, and Romero, as well as 10 Magic XP Brew, 10 Force XP Brew, and 10 Spirit XP Brew. But since it's Raid's birthday, all new and existing players can also get a bunch of free gifts worth over $25. Once you're in game, just enter the promo code 3YearsRaid to get your hands on everything. Make sure to check out the link in the description, and a huge thanks to Raid for sponsoring this video. Alright, let's just jump into the build. As always, there will be some extra gameplay of a Chaos 35 at the end of the video, and if you guys enjoy the video, please make sure to drop a like and subscribe for videos similar to this one. I have an insane migraine right now, but I need to get this video out today, so my apologies if my explanations are a little bit off. It's kind of hard to focus when I'm in this much pain, but it's alright. Getting into the build itself, so there's a couple things that I want to explain about how it works, but first off, I want to preface this by saying that this build is fairly difficult to take advantage of. There's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of different things that I'm combining with this build. The previous version of this build, which I do think is better in certain scenarios in certain ways, which I'll go over while talking about this build, the previous version of this build is going to be a lot easier to set up for you guys. The main reason that I wanted to make this version of it is because I foresee the previous version getting nerfed, and I foresee Double Knot getting nerfed. So basically what I'm doing with this current build is I'm taking both of my previous builds and putting them together. I'm using a Double Knot build plus a Executioner's Blade build at the same time. The majority of our damage is actually going to come through Executioner's Blade, getting a whole bunch of status effects, while Double Knot is literally just an added component onto that, enabling us to use pixies and having the pixies just do even more damage. The Double Knot itself is going to hit for about 1 million or so, and then the status effects are going to hit for anywhere from 500k to 4 million. And if you get really lucky with Contagion, they could hit for an insane amount of damage, like upwards of 100 million. You just have to get absolutely like crazy lucky. And with this build, I didn't really want to rely on Contagion and getting lucky. I wanted this build to be insanely consistent, and that's the reason that we're using Executioner's Blade and Alchemical Agent. The way that we're able to proc Executioner's Blade, the way that this works is gun and spell critical hits have a chance to create an ethereal blade. So we're going with From the Shadows, and then we're going to be throwing pixies. This is going to count as a spell critical hit. That's then going to proc our Executioner's Blade. Our Executioner's Blade is going to proc status effects via Alchemical Agent, getting extra status effect damage with potent poisons. and then making the enemy take increased damage with exploit their weakness. And then we use contagion, where anytime that we apply a status effect through alchemical agent, it has a chance to apply another one, and this is going to double dip off of all of our extra damage. And then we're using a spell blade, which is actually going to deal spell damage as well as melee damage. This is not going to deal a spell hit, but it will deal spell damage, which is going to enable our Executioner's Blade itself to hit really, really hard, because we're getting so much extra spell damage in the form of spell shot, getting high thread count, etc. The reason that we're able to get double knot is with a class item that has +3 double knot. We're also going to be using a paradigm where our melee damage is going to be increased by our spell damage. So we're getting a whole bunch of spell damage. That's then going to increase the damage that our spell blade is doing, and then we're converting some of that spell damage into more melee damage, therefore making our Executioner's Blade do more. And then we get Alchemical Agent to proc some status effects. Our status effects do a lot of damage, and double knot literally just here to just do a whole bunch of extra damage. If you're using guns with this build, double knot literally isn't going to do anything, and then you don't have to use a class item with double knot. But as I'm sure you guys know, pixies are absolutely broken, and pairing pixies with double knot, since they count as a spell, and double knot just proccing over and over because we're using from the shadows and guaranteeing those crits, double knot is going to do crazy amounts of damage with the pixies. But if you just want to use guns, don't use a double knot class item. I'll talk about that more when we get into class items. The main thing that you want to know is that when it comes to Executioner's Blade, it's going to scale, or it's going to proc based on how many hits the enemy takes, right? So ideally you want to use a weapon that's going to hit multiple times. That's pretty much why pixies are really good. If you watch my previous video, which I'd highly recommend just watching anyway, so you have a better understanding of exactly everything that's going on, because if I were to explain everything, it would take a while, and you guys don't really need to know a lot about it. But if you want to know how we're getting up to 50 million DPS and how many hits we're hitting, feel free to watch that video. But we're basically hitting a ton of times with pixies, and this is going to, every single individual hit is going to proc an Executioner's Blade. That's really good. I'll talk about more weapon options, but that's the main gist of it. When it comes to our hero stats, you want to max out crit damage for obvious reasons, and then you want status damage. These are the two things that you care about. The secondary, you could go for spell cooldown or skill cooldown. I go for skill cooldown just to have from the shadows up as often as possible. Skill tree we kind of already talked about. You want to put 3 into magic bullets if you're playing the gun build. Some reload speed is really good for the pixies and any gun that you're using. Warming up, fire rate is amazing. Glass cannon is really good for the extra spell damage, but if you want to use a ward that is not the Cursed Wit and you want more survivability, swap out glass cannon for mage armor. And then we have 1 point to font of mana. You could swap some prestidigitation into from reload speed into font of mana if you want better cooldown. Doesn't really matter all that much. And then high thread count for the spell weaving stack, so we get the extra spell damage. And then of course we don't actually have to spec into double knot for our double knot class item to give us this bonus here. In the Stabo tree, 5 into arsenal, melee, spell, and gun, absolutely insane. 5 into potent poisons to make our status effects do a ton of damage. Exploit their weakness, so per status effect we gain 6% increased damage. With max status effects, it's a lot of extra damage. Swift Death, just for extra damage modifier. Whenever we're moving, we're going to get extra damage there. You could swap Swift Death into Nimble Fingers. I haven't really tested that all that much. I did put 3 points into Contagion. Contagion is not like, this is not some insane Contagion build where you have to get really lucky and you're just hoping that this procs. You could kind of make this build like that, but that's not really what we're going for here. Contagion is literally just here just for the chance of extra damage, and just because I felt like 3 points into this and having a likelihood of it like randomly proccing for a huge number would be a little bit better than going for Nimble Fingers. But if you want more consistency, Nimble Fingers is just flat out spell damage and fire rate that you'll get all the time. Unfortunately, I just don't have enough points for sneak attack. It's a pretty low amount of crit damage anyway, so not a big deal. I have some points into 1,000 cuts. This is just a whole bunch of extra damage. If you're getting a ton of melee critical hits, which we are, the bosses are usually going to die by the time that this is stacked up, but if your version of the build isn't like nearly as maximized, you'll have this stacked up and it's a whole bunch of extra damage, so that's pretty good. Alchemical Agent, absolutely mandatory. Melee crits, apply random status effects. That's going to be really good with Contagion and just getting all that status effect damage. And then Executioner's Blade, of course, which recently got buffed from 100% to 150%, and this is just going to do a ton of damage as well. When it comes to the weapons, I kind of already talked about this. I'm going to be using a Fear Not Pixie because these are going to deal spell damage. You could also use a Bloodshot Pixie. These also deal spell damage, and these are pretty good. Which one is better for this? I'm not entirely sure. The Cross Bolt is going to deal more damage per hit, but the Bloodshot hits more times. I don't really know if the Bloodshot is better for the Executioner's build version. I just don't like the reload speed of these. But either or is going to be really good. When it comes to actual weapons, you guys have a ridiculous amount of options. The Sawmill Cryo is really good. The Liquid Cooling is really good. The Nightshade is going to be solid. The Sword Explosion recently got a buff and is very, very strong. Any Torg weapon that has a whole bunch of like times 18, this is fairly good, but I don't think it's as good as a Sword Explosion. Auto magic is alright. The Queen's Cry with the laser turret is going to do a whole bunch of separate damage instances, so that's pretty good. And then a kettle drum is also very good. Anything, basically you just want something that's going to hit the enemy a ton of times in 1 second. All of these guns are very, very good for that. So the kettle drum is going to hit 20 times in 1 second per shot, right? Which is really good. The Queen's Cry turret hits a whole bunch of times per shot. The liquid cooling has very, very high fire rate, shoots 2 bullets at a second. Very good. Same reason that the Nightshade is really good. All those are very good options. If you guys have anything that you really like using, like a skeet prod or whatever you want, this will probably be perfectly fine for it. All you want to do is just be able to proc Executioner's Blade a ton right off the rip so that you get Alchemical Agent stacked up almost immediately. That's kind of the reason that you want the weapon to have a really high fire rate and hit the target multiple times. As for the other weapons, I always run around with the Delusion so that I can proc Soaked on enemies so they take 50% extra damage from Frost Lightning, which is really good. And then I like to have a handbow literally just to throw out and get some extra spellweaving stacks. When it comes to the spellblade itself, ideally you want to get one that is whatever element of whatever main weapon you're using. So for example, if I'm using a Cryo Fear Not, I want to be using a Cryo Spellblade because then I'm going to be stacking a whole bunch of cryo damage. However, if you're using like a lightning thing, then you just try to get a lightning Spellblade. When it comes to the class item here, kind of already mentioned this, I'm using a double knot one, and then with 1,000 cuts here, this is really good. Spell shot power, all damage dealt, spell damage. The best thing that you want to get on here is going to be spell damage. That's the biggest thing that you can get. All damage dealt is also very, very strong. And then you want it to be a warped paradigm. Definitely make sure that it's a warped paradigm with this build. But if you just want to use guns, you don't actually have to use a double knot one. You'd probably rather have something like my previous one, which is a high thread count, going to give you extra spell damage, and then that's just going to be really, really strong as well. Double knot is really just for if you want to use pixies. You don't actually have to have double knot for the pixies to do damage. The reason that I'm using it is just because that's kind of what I was using with my previous build. Double knot's really, really broken, and it's just going to add a whole bunch of extra damage for you guys. But if you don't really want to use double knot class item, or double knot ends up getting nerfed, then I would just swap it to a high thread count or something like that. Definitely make sure it is a warped paradigm though. Alternatively, if you can't get a warped paradigm, you definitely want to, but alternatively, you could use like a smart armor or something. That would be pretty good. Comes to the spell, we're obviously going to be using a Buffmeister with Bonk and Zap. Bonk is going to give us a whole bunch of extra melee damage, and Zap is going to give us a whole bunch of spell damage, which is literally perfect for this. Buffmeister, insanely good, always going to be really good. If you feel like using an actual spell, you could actually deal pretty good damage with a spell and then have it proc Executioner's Blade, because it is going to count as a spell critical hit. So if you feel like using like an Ice Spike or something, you could probably throw that on and deal decent damage, but a Buffmeister is ultimately going to buff your gun damage. So that's why we're using that. When it comes to the neck, this is pretty important. You definitely want to make sure that you get one that is going to have an elemental damage modifier of whatever weapon that you're using. Frost damage, insanely good, and then spell shot power, of course, is going to increase how much spell damage you get per spell weaving stack, so that's going to be really strong. A lot of people in my previous video said that they were having trouble with the build because the main thing there is that you want to get a whole bunch of extra global damage whenever you're trying to make double knot scale really high. So if you're missing like 50% frost damage enchant, or you're missing 50% frost damage on the neck, you're not really scaling that double knot at all. Therefore, it's not, going to be double dipping a lot. Kind of going on a side tangent that I didn't fully explain, but I explained in the previous video. But if you're having problems with damage, especially with double knot, one of the reasons is going to be not having a frost damage or a global damage modifier. This is definitely what you want. It doesn't need to be a thurge at all. It could be literally whatever you want. This is just going to help you lower the cooldown on From the Shadows. Ideally, you want a little bit more all damage dealt, but overall, this roll is really, really strong. When it comes to the ward, I use a Cursed Wit always, just because it's the maximum damage potential. However, you could get an Ancient Deity that's going to have extra frost damage, and I believe you can get Amp on it as well. That would be pretty good if you want like survivability. Or you could even swap the Cursed Wit to a Bad Egg. Some people have been saying that Cursed Wit is also bugged, kind of like how Smart Armor used to be, where when you enter a portal, if your shield is already depleted, you won't gain the 100% increased damage. So if you want to avoid that, you could use a Bad Egg. Entirely up to you. I just like to use a Cursed Wit just for the maximum potential. When it comes to the rings, so these recently got changed. You want to have a championship ring because this is going to give you the highest subtext, which is 50%. Mood rings got nerfed down to 33%. If you care about mobbing and just like doing chaos chambers and not really killing bosses fast, you could use a mood ring, and that's ultimately going to be better for you when you pair it with glass cannon, because you'll have that 33% up all the time. But in the purpose of killing bosses as fast as possible, you want the championship ring, because 50% is obviously better than 33%. You want it to have spell damage and melee critical hit damage. You could get a number of variations with this. I don't even know how much it matters that it's spell damage. I tried a melee damage one, and it didn't really seem all that good. Gun damage is going to scale up double knots damage, but it's not going to scale up your Executioner's Blade, but it will scale the base damage of a gun. So it's kind of up to you. What you have available to you ultimately is what you should put on. Action skill cooldown rate is going to be really good here. Otherwise, your From the Shadows is going to be a really long cooldown. Ultimately, I would just aim for spell damage, action skill cooldown rate, and then whatever else you can get on it is just whatever else you get. That's pretty much it for the build. Hopefully all of that makes sense. I'm just going to run into a Chaos Chamber and kind of just show you guys some gameplay. I don't want to show a ton of it because ultimately the double knot build is going to be better for mobbing, like my previous version of the build, because that damage is instantaneous, and that's kind of why I prefer that version of the build. But it is very subject to getting nerfed because of how absolutely broken double knot is. This build I do think has like more upward potential if you get lucky with like contagion, or if the boss were to stay alive for like a long period of time. Those status effects are going to do absolutely ridiculous amounts of damage, but double knot is going to deal that damage instantaneously, which is kind of why I like having double knot plus the status effects, so then you're not like super reliant on the status effects themselves doing a whole bunch of damage. You're kind of using the best of both worlds. But if you want to use a gun, here, I'll put on a Nightshade because that's my favorite mobbing weapon. If you want to use a gun, you can deal insane damage with that. I'd probably swap a ring to gun damage for mobbing if I wanted to, but I mean, as you can see, for mobbing, the build's perfectly fine. Like, you just throw around the pixies and then just deal a whole bunch of damage. It won't, like, proc for an immediate 3 million like it would with double knot, but you'll get the 1 million proc. And it's like, does that really make all that big of a difference? Not really, especially because when you're on the bosses, like I was saying, the status effects are going to deal pretty much all the damage for you anyway. But as you can see, we just run around and the Nightshade itself is going to do a whole bunch of damage. The thing about the Executioner's Blade is that you're not really proccing the blades on when you're like mobbing, because it takes a second for them to actually like spawn, right? And I don't even think the blades can hit this guy. Why does my Nightshade feel like it has terrible handling? I don't know. But when you're mobbing, your blades aren't really going to hit them, because ideally you want to kill them before the blades even end up hitting them. So I don't know, it's kind of weird. The build ultimately I think is like the best for bossing, and the other build I think is a little bit better for overall. But like I said, the previous version of the build does have the chance of getting nerfed, while this one I don't think will get nerfed. And I mean, pixies are kind of going to carry the mobbing anyway. If you guys are interested in seeing a Clawbringer build, I've been working on one, but it's mainly status effect damage, because like the hammer itself got pretty heavily nerfed with the Warped Paradigm nerf happening, the mood rings getting nerfed, all these things getting nerfed. It's made it very difficult to make the hammer do actually a lot of damage. I've been waiting for Clawbringer to get some sort of buff, or for there to be a balancing change where, like, I don't know, abilities get buffed or something. And that literally just hasn't happened, and I've been waiting for that to happen. So I don't know. I don't know if I want to do that build, because it's kind of just like Contagion, but I throw a hammer instead of using like Executioner's Blade or whatever, which is kind of cool, but at the same time, like, I want the hammer itself to do a whole bunch of damage, you know? Anyway, the gameplay of the Chaos 35 is not particularly interesting. You kind of just pop your skills and throw the pixies around, and there's not a whole lot else happening. Like I said, though, you could use all kinds of different weapons, and it'll do pretty good. But yeah, the build is pretty straightforward. I'm sure you guys have seen, you know, plenty of builds like this. I just wanted to make a version of it that's kind of unique in the form of like mixing two builds together, and it has like the potential to do really, really high damage if you get lucky, but it'll also just probably be good no matter what, because I don't foresee Executioner's Blade ever getting changed in, you know, the way that it functions. And there's so many different ways to take advantage of it that I think it'll just be always pretty good. If there's any other builds that you guys are interested in, or that you guys have been, you know, working on and think should be covered, feel free to let me know in the comments. But otherwise, I don't know. I kind of wanted to make this build future-proof, because I don't really plan on making a whole bunch of extra build videos for this game. I'm kind of been like done with the game recently. I'm kind of just waiting for Outriders, to be honest with you guys. Gearbox, like, every Thursday I hope that there's a balancing change that enables me to log on and like do some crazy stuff with a new build. But every Thursday it's just been like, nothing's really happening. Oh, they buffed Sword Explosion. Oh, they nerfed rings. Sick, dude. Like nothing's really happened, you know what I mean? So I've kind of been waiting for something that might not ever happen. But anyway, the Chaos gameplay is pretty boring. I'm just going to get to the boss, and I'll show you guys that, and then that'll be pretty much be it. Alright, we're at the boss. I wasn't going to do any raid bosses, but I actually got pretty lucky with what I got here. I got 3 into Potent Poison. Actually, not too lucky, but I got a little bit into Contagion, so I figured I wanted to try out the, at least Barkin scene at the very end here, just to see how much damage that does. I'm just going to use Pixies against this guy. It's kind of annoying. This guy has 2 phases, so like the first phase I can just instantly... yeah, he just instantly dies, right? But the second one, I'm not going to have From the Shadows up, so I kind of have to get lucky with my Pixies critting or not, because I don't have a whole bunch of like crit chance by default. But if they crit, then I get pretty lucky. I mean, he died pretty quick. That was pretty decent. Oh, okay. Yeah, that can happen. he almost died and then decided to not take any damage. But anyway, I just want to show you guys. I didn't even use the delusion there because I guess I was being dumb. But I wanted to see if we get really lucky on Barkensine potentially, and if we just hit a really high number. But if not, whatever, you guys can at least see the damage. I didn't want to do all the raid bosses because I already showed that at the beginning of the video. But figure we may as well throw Barkensine. He kind of has like the most health anyway, next to the Maker, so still pretty decent. So you toss the delusion. I don't have my curse wood up actually, which is a little unlucky. Toss the delusion out, and we throw the pixies. Oh my, that was actually really fast, dude. That was actually crazy. He died so fast we don't even get to see if the status effects like hit an insane number or not. Don't even see if contagion, like if you get lucky, I'm sure you guys have seen, contagion can like randomly do like 500 million. Like it's absolutely insane. If you just get like super lucky, it could do some crazy things. But I didn't want the build to be, you know, reliant on lol me shooting the guy 100 times and maybe get lucky. Anyway, that's pretty much it for the video. Hopefully you guys did enjoy. If you did, please make sure to drop a like, subscribe for videos similar to this one, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.